Hello, and welcome to another episode of Influence and Growth Mastery. Today, I have with me Robert Deleidi with Crosscheck Group. Robert has been in the financial industry for 26 years, 20 years in the payment services industry, and during his tenure with Hawken Clark, Robert has been an executive leader responsible for over the national division. And the division included 50 states focusing on financial institutions of all various sizes. And I have to tell you, Robert has a deep understanding and experience working with C-level executives, providing industry insights to support the individual strategy of each unique organization. He works with organizations of all sizes of maximum revenue to improve program performance and position financial institutions for consistent success through financial results. Have to tell you, he is extremely intelligent when it comes to understanding check programs in the financial institution and the credit union space. I have had the pleasure of working with him over the past 4 years or so in the check negotiation space. And so today it is a pleasure to have Robert with me to talk about the check negotiation, understanding the pricing and such when it comes to understanding the check program process of what you have in your financial institution or the credit union. So with further ado, I want to get right into what we have to talk about. Robert, it's such a pleasure to have you here with me today.
Thank you, Tonya. Good morning. I'm a long-term consistent listener of the podcast and absolutely thrilled to be here today.
Great. It's exciting to have individuals like you on the podcast who actually grew up, I'm going to say somewhat in banking. And although that you've not actually been a banker, you've been deep in the industry experience working with financial institutions. Robert, tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, I spent nearly 25 years working with financial institutions across the country of all sizes. Grew up in banking with an organization named Hawken Clark. Started my career in Boston, Massachusetts as an executive managing relationships for that organization. Quite honestly, took the job as a transitional type job until I determined what it was I really wanted to do in life. And nearly 22 years later, a couple of moves across the country, finished my career with them back in 2019. So been around banking and bankers for a long time, built a tremendous amount of great relationships with folks across the country and always enjoyed the banking industry.
I love that. I'm very familiar with Hawken Clark. Of course, I'm very familiar with, Deluxe and some of the others. I've done business with both, but Hawken Clark, longtime relationship with Hawken Clark. So tell me a little bit about, Robert, what you're doing today, what you're doing now.
Yeah. So after spending 22 years in an industry that was focused on financial institutions and the payment side of the business, I founded, along with my business partner, Bradley Ward, we founded an organization called the Crosscheck Group. And what we do now is we work on behalf of financial institutions, providing industry insights and advice on their relationship with their payment provider. And we provide advice and insights on the business, hoping to drive profit, lower cost, and ultimately provide a better relationship for the financial institution.
That's wonderful. Robert, I don't even know how many years this question goes back, but I've heard for a long time. And especially now that banks and the industry, the world is going today with so much digital. Digital is at our hands easily. But tell me about checks. Aren't those going away?
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, Tonya. When I took the job, my first job in the industry, early 2000s, checks were going away. In fact, I was hired to be a part of an organization that was looking to diversify their relationships with financial institutions. So as checks migrated and declined, what else could we have done to build a positive relationship with that financial institution, whether it be cards or other solutions that they have available? So checks have been declining for a very long time. So some key stats about checks. In 2021, over 16 billion checks were written in the United States, and the average amount was over $1,600. So these are high value purchases, typically consumer to business. So as we do see the decline, there's still certainly enough checks being written that they are relevant to many consumers. And as you might guess, Tonya, the consumers that are writing checks are typically those consumers at a financial institution that have higher deposits. So these are high value customers that we want to still make sure that we're delivering a quality product and service for them.
Wow, that's interesting to me that it is your higher value customers that are still writing checks. I would love to dig into that a little more at some point and really understand those customers and the strategy behind why they do that. But, oftentimes, I rarely even write a check. And I even find myself today, if I need to write a check that's higher than my debit card limit, I find myself texting my banker or calling my banker and asking them to raise my limit so that I can use my debit card.
Sure.
Or, I'll use a credit card so that I don't have to write the check. So, but I do remember having those discussions with, my Harlan Clark rep back then, Bradley Ward, about checks going away. So I love that you shared those statistics. So Robert, why would a financial institution or a credit union even, and so while we talk about financial institutions, I'm really including credit unions in the mix of this, but why would they hire a third party help or consultant, if you will, to help them evaluate their check provider?
Yeah, it's a great question, Tonya. It's seriously one that we're faced with often. And the reasons are so vast. We have some organizations that are looking for a more strategic business partner. They want to have the right business fit. That's people, process, technology. Oftentimes people are validating whether they do have the right business partner, and they want to hire somebody with specific industry insight to help them through that process. We've been hired by some organizations that they're large enough that their board requires them to take every third-party relationship to bid once every 5 years. So as you might imagine, being a banker, Tonya, those endeavors are time-consuming. It takes a lot out of an organization. And oftentimes what I find with financial institutions is you have so many people wearing so many different hats. And the check program really is never a priority. So organizations don't have a lot of expertise on hand. So if they can turn that over to somebody that they trust to go do the due diligence for them, dig into the numbers, validate the billing, it's really time consuming. If they can hand it over to a third party and still get the results that they desire, oftentimes that's why we're brought in.
I would even say, Robert, from my experience as a banker, 34 years in banking, and I even had, vendor relationships, partner relationships that I was responsible for. And the the check processing relationship was one of mine. A few times, it would bounce around some, but oftentimes it's found its way back to me.
Sure.
But I will share with you that I think the check printing is not necessarily a relationship that people in the banking industry really think about managing for some reason, like they do some of the other relationships. And I'm not really sure why that is. I don't know if they build such a relationship with them that there's just such a trust there that they feel like that they're just going to take care of them, or if there is, if they just think that checks is checks and it's going to take care of itself, that it doesn't need to be managed. I'm not really sure what that is, but I know that oftentimes, even for myself, I didn't think of certain things until, my rep would come in and ask me about certain things that I would say, I haven't thought about that.
Yeah.
And, I take ownership of that because there were things I probably should have been more aware of. And, we would take the contract to bid occasionally. And I just think that bankers should be more aware of the relationship, the pricing, the fees, all of those types of things. And because I know that there is more products, services, things to offer there. And another thing that I'll bring out is the relationship in regards to the customer service. And if you don't mind, I'll just throw out an example that goes right along with why they might hire a third-party provider. And this just is an example of a client, name unmentioned, but I wasn't necessarily hired to become involved in the check printing negotiation. It just more or less, I overheard a conversation about customer service and some frustration.
Sure.
And I just said, hey, look, those things can be fixed. Mm-hmm. Have you tried to have conversations with the rep to fix those things? And they were so frustrated that they were like, it can't be fixed. And I'm like, it can be fixed. I can fix those things for you. And they were like, well, have at it if you can fix those things, And so, so I was able to step in as a third party and help that institution work on things that just weren't going well. And so when I started looking at the whole relationship, there were more things to uncover, which eventually led to the negotiation of the upcoming contract, which then ended up resulting in a win-win for the bank, which ultimately ended up in a win-win for the current provider, because we ended up staying with the same provider and didn't move to another provider. And so it ended up, because the bank was so frustrated, they wanted to move to another provider. And they would have, had I not gotten involved, and they would have done it without even letting the current provider know that they were unhappy. And so, I think that's a prime example of when things aren't going real well, get someone involved that can help you. And you may even have another example of that. But
Tonya, the example that you just gave, there's so many things that you said in that example. And quite honestly, that is a typical situation, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned, hey, it's just checks, right? So many organizations are prepared to put a rubber stamp on, hey, we got a new offer. Our contract's up in a year. The incumbent comes in and puts an offer on the table. Hey, we don't really want to go through a transition. We're not going to leave, so to speak. So let's just rubber stamp and get this off our plate. That's a missed opportunity for the financial institution. But you also mentioned, hey, the relationship is broke, right? We're unhappy. And to your point, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to go through a conversion and switch providers.
Absolutely.
The check organizations, they're not looking to compromise the relationship. They have a desire to retain the business. They have a desire to grow and diversify the business. And unfortunately, they have a core product that we talked about earlier that is becoming less and less relevant. Well, like any organization, they're looking to grow their profit too. How they do that sometimes contradicts how the bank wants to go to market. And to your point, many times having a third party or a mediator come in and get everything on the table, oftentimes that helps actually grow the relationship. We've got many examples where people looked at the check printer as just a check printer. And after going through a process with the cross-check group mediating on behalf of both organizations, what we have found is the check provider can bring a lot more value to the relationship, even if it's just a check relationship. How they go to market, how they strategize, how the bank accepts the order, whether it's phone or internet, digitally. So a lot of those things can come out with the help of a third party. So to your point, it's not just about financials. There's oftentimes where we're trying to find the right strategic fit for these financial institutions and get the relationship back on track, so to speak.
We can expound a little bit more on this, because in that particular situation, we were able, well, I'll just back up and say that number one, the check provider was very happy. I'll use the word happy. They were very happy that I got involved, because they said multiple times, had you not got involved, we would have lost. And they knew that, because as we went through that process, they saw the unhappiness, and they were able to go back and dig into prior recorded conversations and tickets to where they saw where there was where the problem lied, and where no one stepped in and got involved. And so they were so thankful that I did overhear the conversation and get involved. So, it made for a great relationship for me with them. And then it made for a great relationship for the provider and the bank. And in that, we found that the bank was wanting to engage in two other services that ultimately the provider was able to get from the bank from this whole situation. So even though that it was a huge, I'm going to say significant savings to the bank through the contract negotiation, they even were able to add two significant services, to their product base through this whole thing. And, I helped them work through that whole process as well, and through the project team. And so it was such a win-win for, like I say, for both of them. Yeah. So some great ways to, for a financial institution to take a look at where they are and to do it, 6 months to a year, even prior to their contract renewing, to get us involved in something like that. So
yeah, you make a great point, because in the situation that you just outlined, the bank wins because you have delivered the solution that they're looking for, right? You have taken a broken relationship, potentially got it back on track. And I don't know very many financial institutions that aren't looking for less providers that have more capability, right? Vendor management becomes a huge issue. And unfortunately, for a lot of folks, they look at certain relationships, like the check relationship, for instance, they put them in a bucket. Hey, that's the check provider. And they can't help us in any other way, so to speak. But the reality is the check provider is one of the first outside organizations to touch your customer relationship. And if they had more capability to do more things with data, which they do, wouldn't you want to leverage that data to make that new relationship even stronger? Of course you would.
Absolutely.
So the financial institutions, as they diversify those relationships, they're better off for it. And ultimately the customer wins because they're getting a better customer experience. But to your point earlier, you had good relationship with the rep, right? So it kind of disarmed you a little bit about leaning on them a little bit more for better strategy, better product, better support, better pricing, whatever it might be. We typically engage at the C level, and the folks at the C level, they have a more objective approach to find the right business fit. And they kind of wash away the relationship through this process to say, hey, are you in line to help us long-term deliver a better customer experience, and why? And when you look at these relationships in an objective way, my belief is the relationship actually gets stronger. But you have a lot of folks that manage that relationship day to day at the bank that feel uncomfortable taking that organization to a bid or through a process with a third party to really flush out what are their strengths, what's the long-term vision of the organization, and is it in line with our bank to deliver a better customer experience? And to your point, when we get done with our engagements, we often leave the relationship stronger than we found it. So it's a very unique experience for us.
Yes, I completely agree. So with all of that said, Robert, is it just the larger banks that end up benefiting from Crosscheck and Gossage Performance Consulting services?
Yeah, I would tell you it's a resounding no. The business model that we use with our partners, we've worked with organizations that are 30 billion in assets, a national organization across the country, and we worked with a 150 million asset bank. The results tend to be the same from a percentage standpoint. So no, I would tell you quite the opposite. In fact, I don't know many community banks that aren't looking to save a little bit more, provide a little bit more value to their customers. I don't know many community banks that don't have vice presidents and senior vice presidents that are wearing several hats, and their bandwidth is very small, leading them to the point where they really can't dig into these opportunities. And we talked about the rubber stamping of existing relationships. So no, Tonya, the answer is that organizations of all size would benefit from an engagement with Crosscheck for sure.
We talked about just a few minutes ago, some of the problems that the banks have that Crosscheck solves. Is there anything else that you could think of that would, cause a bank to reach out to Crosscheck that you could help them mitigate?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons why a bank would want to reach out. What we see are some organizations are reluctant to invite in a third party. And there's many different reasons for that. What we see a lot is, hey, I've managed this relationship for 15, 20 years, right? I don't want to be exposed, so to speak. Like if there's a better offer to be had, did I not do my job? And that sometimes it's a tough challenge to overcome, and it's often why we're hired at the C level, where they take out the gray area of the relationship. But at the end of the day, I tell those folks that feel that way, check printing has evolved a lot in the last couple of years. I mean, just think about what we've been through as a country, as a world, the pandemic. That has changed a lot of things. When you had organizations shutting their branches, right? Well, people used to reorder checks by coming into the bank and dropping off a reorder slip, and the bank would fulfill that. Well, now all of a sudden the bank has lost that touch point, and reorders are coming in through the phone and through the internet. That's changed the relationship altogether. What other products and services are being sold to the customer? So I tell folks all the time, it's not a knock on you as an individual to hire a third party. We do this all day, every day. We've negotiated, as two individuals that have over 50 years of experience in the business, I would safely say we've negotiated thousands and thousands of contracts. What could take us, 20, 30 hours of work would take a financial institution hundreds of hours to go determine. So those insights and the expertise in a specific area of the bank, we just have some stuff available to us that most folks don't get exposure to. So it's not a reflection on the individual, and they shouldn't feel like they haven't done their job. In fact, I think it's more courageous to hire a third party and say, hey, what can we learn from you folks by engaging you?
Absolutely. And I would even add, what may take you guys 30 hours and the bank's hundreds of hours is the reporting that we get.
Yeah.
I will just say from my experience, the reporting can be extremely confusing, very difficult to understand. Yeah. And so, and unless you worked with one of the check printing companies and really have a good understanding of all of the data behind the numbers, you could be missing some data that you need to know and truly understand, to know exactly the discounts you're getting, what you're truly paying for, and all of the data just behind the numbers in the reporting. Because I remember having call after call after call, just really trying to understand the data. Yeah.
It's an amazing point that you raised, Tonya. In fact, for your wonderful listeners that are watching on YouTube and can get a look at me, certainly I've lost a lot of hair over the years digging into that data. But to your point, it's almost like you need a doctorate to understand that reporting.
Seriously, yes.
And to line that reporting up with your GL from an accounting standpoint, to trust and verify that what you're buying is what you're being charged for. It's a lot of work. So to hand that off to somebody and say, hey, so you guys you're gonna dive into a very, very deep analysis, and you're gonna flush out all this data, and you're gonna come back to us with a summary of that data that is really simple for us to understand. You're gonna do all that work on our behalf. Most people raise their hand right away. Where do we sign up, right? Because truthfully, that is a lot of the work, understanding what it is that we're paying for. And, tell me a bank that doesn't have programs out there that have been in place for 20, 30 years where you get the first order free, or you get every order free, and you've grandfathered in all these different strategies to deepen your customer relationships. There's nothing wrong with those, but to go view how you're performing with that data is extremely difficult. And then you look at discretionary waves and why a program might be upside down because we're giving away a ton of checks. It gets to be a real challenge, to your point. So some of the value that we deliver is, hey, here's all of your reporting in a very neat, buttoned up executive summary. The folks that we work with would absolutely tell you that is one of the biggest benefits they get from us.
Mm-hmm. I remember, Robert, back in the day, going through my own training with the reports and then handing it off to someone else, in the operations department, and scheduling training after training after training. And I think our rep, may have even become frustrated with us because he would say, you're just going to have to trust it. You're just going to have to trust it. And it's like, how do you, when you're the type of individual that things have to, all of the dots have to connect, and you have to understand the strategy behind things. It's like you're pulling your hair out because you're like, when you add these numbers together, they don't equal. And it's just so frustrating and hard to understand. But then when you're looking at it from your perspective, it all comes together and you're like, oh, wow, this does make sense. So yeah, I completely get that. So tell us one of your favorite stories that a bank has shared with you regarding their results or their success.
Wow. There'd be a few that come to mind. One of our first engagements, we were hired by a CEO, a very good friend of ours, who leads roughly a $2 billion organization. And this individual, extremely intelligent person, tremendous amount of success, well thought of in the industry. And as we finished our engagement, he kind of shared his experience with us. And, hearing somebody say that, there's some insights that these folks provide that being in the banking industry for 20 plus years, I was just simply unaware of. That was eye-opening for us. And that was, the point where we felt like, man, there's really a lot of runway here for this organization to continue to provide value to folks like that. And, customer relationships is the biggest key for any banker. I mean, we're all trying to find profitable customer relationships, long-term relationships. And when we looked at some of these engagements, it was astounding to us that you could have a customer that's completely happy with your technology, completely happy with the relationship they share with your bank. But the fact that they were going to pay $30, sometimes $40 for a box of checks drove that customer to go outside of the bank to get their checks. And we see that in the business. And quite honestly, as a customer, Tonya, I would never pay $40 for a box of checks.
No way.
But what has happened over the years is the check printers have had increases, and they always come to the bank to say, well, we'll protect your profit, and that the retail price is going to go up, whether it was delivery or the price of the product. And what we really did is we forced these customers to go direct to consumer, and they're ordering their checks through whether it's Costco or Sam's or online somewhere. But as a banker, you have to sit back and say, hey, why would I allow that? Why would I force my customer due to price to go to the direct market and have somebody else service them? And this individual was surprised at the fact that, hey, you might lose that touch point for the check, but what else? What are the products and services will that organization provide them that you are now competing for? And you have a customer that's been with you for 30 years, and because the check price got too high, they left to go order checks somewhere else. And now all of a sudden they might have a loan offer or a credit card offer from somebody other than you. So that was really eye-opening to us, that from a banker's perspective, something that is, to your point earlier, just checks could lead to the loss of a high-value customer. That was eye-opening through that process, and something that we looked at and said, boy, this is meaningful to these bankers. This CEO now got it. And that was pretty eye-opening for us early on.
I love that you said that, because I was having a conversation with a very successful fintech company the other day. And he was talking about his bank, and he was talking about how banks are clueless. I'll use that word. They're clueless about what their customers are doing. And just to your point, how many services they're using from other industries. And he was using himself as an example. And he was saying that while he's banked at this particular bank for years, there are 12 services that he is using elsewhere. And his bank has no idea. He said they've never once reached out to me about any of them. And he said, as great things continue to come up on the market, I very well may continue to extend those numbers. And he said, And unless that bank wakes up and figures out that I'm not the only customer doing this, they may eventually lose me, because one of these other 12 may come up with something that moves me away from the bank that I've done business with all these years.
Yeah.
And he's so right. And so, I mean, we as financial institutions need to understand what our customers, what and where our customers are, what they're attracted to and what they're doing, outside of our walls of banking.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that is a very good point, because we in the business we're in, we know that those companies that are printing their checks are offering them other opportunities to get more business out of them. And the checks that they're printing, not all of them, the checks that they're printing is not good quality. And the operations departments that are having to handle those checks, it's giving the staff in those departments, it's wreaking havoc on their processing, because they may reject, they're reading wrong, somebody's having to correct them because the Micker ink may not be good. I mean, it just causes all kinds of problems. So not only are they missing the income, they're trying to be sold something else. It's causing them operational issues, efficiencies, time, maybe more staffing. It just compounds the lost revenue from that. So yeah, there's quite a bit there that it impacts from that. So that's definitely a great story. So what are some of the toughest challenges that banks have to overcome, Robert, that you're seeing?
Yeah, I mentioned one earlier, reluctance, the reluctance to invite a third party in.
I would agree.
Folks tell you all the time, hey, I just don't have the bandwidth. I don't have enough time. And quite honestly, it's the number one reason why we're hired. We don't have the time to dig into this. So we're going to turn this over to somebody else. But you asked about some of the challenges. I would say reluctance around the exposure. I've been managing this relationship, and I almost don't want you to find what I might have missed. That's one challenge. The second challenge that I see a lot, Tonya, is getting their hands around data. It's oftentimes they'll ask somebody how their relationship's performing from a financial standpoint, and they might just simply know, hey, the GL is showing that we're up or down a few bucks, right? Mm-hmm. But they've never really dug into the numbers to be able to say, hey, how is our program performing? How can we optimize this program? And to your point earlier, checks are not very high on the priority. So do I want to spend a bunch of time optimizing a program that is quote unquote going away? So bandwidth and time is usually the biggest challenges that we have. And a starting point for a lot of folks that are managing these relationships is data. Not even sure where to go to get my hands around the data that I need to engage you folks. So those two things become a challenge for us.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. So what outcomes or results can you speak about? Are you able to share any of those?
Sure. I'll speak in percentages. There's organizations that we have worked with. We work in a pay for performance method. And what that means is, hey, we're not going to charge you a retainer fee. We're not asking for a budget up front. What we will do is we will analyze your program. We'll dig through all the data, and we will keep a small percentage of what we deliver the financial institution. And from a results standpoint, I can tell you that they're often very, very surprising in terms of, what we can uncover in terms of fees and increases and things that might not be front and center. But if you dig, you can find that, this program is underperforming. compared to what the market is delivering. Interestingly enough, we stumbled upon an engagement that this bank was nearly 200 million in assets, and they told us, "Hey, we had another consultant look at it and kind of passed on the opportunity. We're just not big enough, and it's not worth enough." And quite honestly, we took the engagement. We thought, "Hey, we can deliver some results that you'll be proud of." And after several months of digging into data and working back and forth with the organization, we delivered nearly $150,000 of profit. And that might not sound like a lot.
That's a lot.
To a community bank, if you looked at that program, that's enough to go hire another employee, if you will. So you talk about bandwidth. What would another employee do for you? So that's on the low end. And of course, we've worked with organizations, 20, 30 billion in assets, and the results have been astounding, certainly beating our expectations. And that's why our organization continues to grow the way that it is.
So was that $150,000 per year over the contract period?
It was total contract value.
Total contract value. Well, that's impressive.
Absolutely. And again, that's a facet of their business that, we were looking to rubber stamp and move on and didn't have the bandwidth. So that can be significant for smaller institutions that are looking to invest in technology and other products and services to enhance that customer experience. That was a budget that they could use to go do that. So,
well, and I might add, and please speak to this, because I know as I have reached out to some financial institutions, and you mentioned this, they feel like they don't have the resources to commit, but they really don't need a lot of resources to commit to this. Speak to that just a little bit.
Yeah.
So that they understand they don't have to commit a lot of time to assist with this process.
Yeah, that's the beauty of our organization. The number one thing that we want to deliver is time savings. So as individuals look at their agreements that are coming out, if you have an agreement that's 2 years out, it's not too early to engage us, because we will begin analyzing that data. We will begin looking at and discussing with individuals at the bank that touch the product. What do they like? What do they not like? What could be better? And we can begin enhancing that relationship right away. We can begin helping them with the analysis of their own data. And then when the time comes to negotiate a new contract, whether the relationship is broken or not, or they're looking to move providers, we can help with all of those things. It's never too early to give us a call, that's for sure. But yeah, the earlier we engage, we typically see results that would surprise many bankers, for sure.
And then I think lastly, and then I want to ask you for some of your last comments, but I think one of the last comments that I would have, and honestly, this is it's a disappointment to me, because it's a shot in the foot to the bank. And I don't know how else to put that other than just to say it like that, because that's who I am. But, as I've reached out to banks, because I help you guys find leads, is that, there's been some times when I have reached out to a financial institution because I think this opportunity is a great opportunity for them to hire CrossCheck to help them with this process and help them get significant savings on their up and coming contract renewal, and have conversation with them, and then maybe do the follow up. And they say, "Oh, well, we went ahead and we went ahead and took the savings that they offered us." And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, you did not just say that. You didn't just do that, because you just gave up a tremendous amount of savings that you could have gotten if you would have hired CrossCheck to help you out. Mm-hmm. And, I'm like, this is definitely, it's just lack of education. It's lack of knowledge. And that's why we're providing this specific interview, this podcast, is to educate, because, it's just that they didn't know. They didn't know. And, but I'm like, oh, we could have just really helped that institution out. And they maybe had an offer on the table, or they may have reached out to the check printing company to see if maybe they should have hired us or whatever. And it's just unfortunate that they, rather than asking questions or having a conversation, they went ahead and signed an agreement. And it, just makes me sick that we could have done something for them. And so either elaborate to that, or, add some lasting comments that you would like to add to the interview, Robert.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point that you make. And not having the time and bandwidth as an excuse, I guess, is probably, as a customer, something I wouldn't be happy with. I think, for me personally, community banking being strong is really important. It's important across the country. And as a leader of a community bank, I think you owe it to your customers to provide the best customer experience possible. I think you owe it to your customers to provide the best value possible. And in areas of your business that you might not be a subject matter expert, I think you should evaluate hiring somebody that might have that industry insight, that exposure to one specific area of your business that can make an impact. Because every area of your business, a small impact in every area of your business could make your organization that much stronger and could deliver a better consumer experience. If you want to keep those customers that banked with you for years, and their parents banked with you and their grandparents, I think we have to evolve as an industry. And we have to keep up with products and services that are relevant to the younger generation, if you will. And that oftentimes means evaluating the relationships that you have. They could be long-standing relationships, but businesses evolve, they change. And I think you owe it to your customers to ensure that when those agreements come up, you're getting the best possible products, the best service for the best value, and in turn, offering those products and services to your customers.
Right. And we want nothing more than to, help them extend the best customer service that they can give, and help them, help them be able to go to, the top executives of their company and say, look at what we just did, in saving the company, X percentage of dollars for the overall the company. So it's a win-win for everybody and an overall great relationship.
Absolutely.
And so, Robert, anything else you want to say? This has been a great conversation.
Well, first and foremost, I'd just like to thank you for the opportunity. Coming on your podcast and all the listeners that you have, tremendous honor for me. So I appreciate it. But yeah, to those of your listeners out there that are looking for, a trusted organization that they could call and add some support to what they're going through, and look at their program and take an objective, unbiased look at their program and offer some opportunities for them to improve their program, we would be honored to work with your folks, the relationships that you have, or the bankers that you have across the country, in a no commitment, no obligation way. Look at their program and give them some thoughts around how we might improve it. We would be delighted to work with your listeners. So we appreciate the opportunity, Tonya.
Excellent, Robert. I appreciate that. So why don't you go ahead and share how you can be reached, maybe your most preferred way to be reached if a bank is interested, because they're hearing this through the podcast. Why don't you go ahead and whether it's through your website or through your email, go ahead and share that information so that they'll have that.
Yeah, hopefully we'll be able to link my information to this podcast, and follow the podcast, and we'll put that information up there for your listeners. crosscheckgroup.com is the website that they can go to learn more. And we'll have our information. My email is rdeleidi, that's DELEIDI @crosscheckgroup.com. And certainly we'll have that information posted on this podcast, Tonya, for all your listeners as well.
Yes, we definitely will post it in the show notes for sure. And so, Robert, again, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a great conversation, great information for our listeners, and specifically the executive management team and those, whether in marketing or retail, that manage the check printing contracts. And so I too can be reached, and we will have that information in the show notes.